Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy So What Day. I am so excited to share with you a couple of projects today. They both are using the same thread palette, which is a brand new product that we have at sulky.com. It's our Rainbows and Unicorns 50 weight cotton thread palette for quilting. It has these great colors in it, all the colors of the rainbow and then some. These are great for unicorn themed fabric prints, rainbows, obviously, and so many other things. So if you have not used the 50 weight cotton thread yet, you're absolutely going to be floored when you use it because it is 100% Egyptian cotton, high quality, long staple thread. And by that, I mean, if you're wondering what long staple means, it means that the threads have longer fibers sort of interlocking along the thread length. So there are less breaking points. It makes it a super great thread for quilting projects. Great and strong for piecing, but it's also lightweight. So when you press your seams to one side or press them open, depending on how you like to press your piecing projects, it's a really nice flat seam that you get. You don't have this telltale bump of, oh, there's where my thread is. And so when you're quilting across your pieced project, your machine just glides effortlessly all over all of those seams, even if you have multiple seam joins along one certain area. So I have a really beautiful quilt behind me that I'm going to showcase today and kind of give you the tutorial for how to create, and also a bonus project that I will share with you after we discuss the quilt. First and foremost, our giveaway today. Every time we do So What here on Facebook, we do a giveaway. So if you are liking, commenting, sharing, engaging with the post, giving me your questions, which some of you are already saying hello. Hello to all of you. Thanks for joining. For all of you engaging with the post today, you are automatically eligible to win our gift, which is this thread palette. So 12 spools of thread. Its retail value is, I'm just double checking. If you purchased all of these separately, this would cost you $29.88. But since we have bundled it together, you save a little bit and it retails for $24.99. So a great giveaway today. And this is the same thread that many of you have come to know and love as our Cotton and Steel thread by Sulky. We partnered with Cotton and Steel, the fabric company, to curate a bunch of beautiful, luscious colors of this thread that coordinate with all of their fabrics that they come out with every season. So the Cotton and Steel thread spools, sorry, I'm trying to find one right here, come in 660 yard spools. So that's a lot of thread that you get on this spool. And we decided to package up some of the 50 weight cotton in our snap spools, which are 160 yards worth of thread. So if you're not familiar with our snap spools, or if you're wondering, what do I mean by that? Each end of a Sulky thread spool opens up and you can store your thread end inside of that little snap top on either end. So the reason it's called a snap spool is, wait for it, because it makes that snapping sound when you push it back down, and then your thread end is stored neatly inside. So a lot of people are just amazed when they see that. They don't realize that the thread spools can do that. So I just kind of demo it at every opportunity. All right, when you're working with the 50 weight thread, you want a 70-10 or 75-11 size needle. And we prefer organ needles. The type of organ needle is determined by the fabric or the technique that you are doing. So the size corresponds to the thread weight, and the type corresponds to your fabric and or technique. Okay, so a 70-10 or 75-11, you can use a universal needle. You can use a quilting needle if you're quilting. You can use a microtex needle if you're working with a very sheer or lighter weight fabric like a cotton voile or a chiffon, something like that. So a microtex needle just has an extra sharp point to it. So you'll be creating needle holes that are very, very fine, so they won't snag or create a hole that's too large for the thread to pass through. So let's see, 70-10, universal, top stitch. Okay, sorry, I'm just organizing my thoughts here. All right, so let's get to the rainbow quilt behind me. I'm calling this the Rainbow Valley quilt. You have probably seen a lot of patterns like this because they utilize a jelly roll of fabric. Do y'all know what a jelly roll is? A jelly roll is a pack of fabric. The jelly roll is seen on the left of this image I just brought onto the screen. And they are 2.5-inch wide strips of fabric by the fabric width. So if you have a 44-inch wide fabric, you're going to get a bunch of strips that are pre-cut to 2.5 by 44. And you can see here, I found this really great Kona cotton jelly roll of all the beautiful rainbow prints. So I thought I have to pair this with the new Rainbows and Unicorns 50 weight cotton thread palette by Sulky. On the right in this image are a bunch of really cute rainbow prints. Honestly, I couldn't decide and I didn't know what I was going to make yet. So I grabbed up this cute little fat quarter bundle as well. There are so many rainbow prints out there. And actually, I remember this time last year pretty much, we were putting cute rainbow pieces of art in our windows and doing rainbow chalk art and things like that in support of everyone undergoing stress and strain from COVID-19. So it's just kind of bringing me full circle and giving me all the goosebumps thinking about that time last year when we were displaying all of our rainbows. It's also Pride Month, so another great opportunity to display our rainbows and support of all of that. So I happened to find so many rainbow prints when I was out searching, and I'm sure you will be able to find some as well. But you can always go the route of searching for just solid prints, because then your quilting gets to really be the star and that thread work isn't competing with your fabric print. But you could easily follow this same sort of technique or quilt pattern and utilize any jelly roll collection that you find. So I grabbed the Rainbow Jelly Roll collection and I paired it with a solid black fabric, which I used for my strips as well as my backing and binding. So in the quilt pattern that's on the blog, which I have linked to in the description of today's post, so you'll get all the instructions, cutting dimensions, all of that by visiting the blog. I mention, cutting a neutral fabric to go behind or on either side of either your jelly roll print or your jelly roll rainbow collection. So you can choose black like I did, white would be really pretty, or even just a tan sort of muslin color would look really cool as well. So, I wanted to show too, Let me just find out where I am on my images. Here is that beautiful thread collection, and you can see how awesome it is on top of my finished quilted piece. I actually sent this to my long arm quilter because I don't have a long arm machine, and she used every single color just about, I think maybe 10 colors out of the thread collection. And with each row of quilting, she changed the thread color out. So I will show you what the back of this quilt looks like. It looks just as beautiful, if not more, than the pieced front because of all of those beautiful thread colors that you can see. Okay, so it really, oops, there we go. So, oh, that's back to my fabric choice. Okay, so here I have cut all of my strips of that neutral or black fabric, and you can see it just on top of my jelly roll pieces. Now, jelly rolls, sometimes you get 42 colors, sometimes you can get 24 colors. So it really just is a matter of whether or not you're getting like a mini jelly roll or a whole jelly roll. So just be mindful of that. I chose one of each of the colors that came in my rainbow jelly roll, but I had plenty left over. So I think I have enough to do a second rainbow quilt. So just keep that in mind when you're purchasing your fabric. Now it's really just a matter of deciding which fabric you want where. And when you're doing a rainbow quilt, it's very easy to lay this out, right? Because obviously you're going red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And in this case, there was a red, orange, an orange, yellow, a green, yellow. So there was a little bit of variation between the colors and a little bit more than just your traditional red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So I just laid mine out, made sure that I had all the colors in line properly, and then it's just a matter of adding your black fabric strips to the rainbow strips, and it goes together very easily. I said to myself, I could have even used my serger to construct this quilt. That's how easy it is. But I wanted to show you this image because if you happen to have a laser light on your machine, I know I am so lucky that I have this capability, but if you happen to have that, it makes 1/4 inch seams so easy. I mean, honestly, putting this together, I think this is the quickest I've ever made a quilt. Now, granted, I did send it away to the long arm quilter. I will not take credit for the quilting, but piecing it together was so simple. So a great quilt for summertime when you don't want to spend all that time in your sewing room. You know, you want to be outside enjoying the fresh air and the sunshine. So this is a really quick sew. After you do your piecing, or you can do this as you go along, it's very important to press. You want to press your seams toward that darker fabric so that everything lies nice and flat when you go to make your quilt sandwich, and whether you're doing the quilting yourself or sending it to a quilter like I did. So here you see my top is all pieced and ready to go. It is lined up along one edge. I think that's really important. You can see that my jelly roll strips all kind of varied in length, but I kept that length there when I gave it to the quilter, just in case she needed some extra to kind of grab onto with the long arm machine. But if you're doing the quilting yourself, you could certainly trim that away depending on what type of quilting you want to do, whether you want to quilt in the ditch of every seam, or I think it would be really pretty to do some outline or echo quilting along your seam lines. So basically kind of top stitching on either side along that black fabric edge, and then you can change up your thread color for each of your lines, and that would just further along the rainbow and be super, super pretty, and yet very simple. So even if you've never done quilting before, or quilting a big quilt like this is intimidating to you, that is a great way to start. And I highly suggest, as you're quilting along these rows, make sure you're starting from the same side of your quilting, so that you don't have any twisting or fabric shifting while you are quilting along. All right, so like I said, I gave this to my long arm quilter. She did a beautiful job. I was so happy with it. So what we did was we decided on a digitized design that sort of went in a triangle pattern, why can't I think of it? A chevron pattern. And so with each row, you could see at the top, and I'll show you some close-ups in a minute, but at the top we started with red, then we went to the orange, yellow, and so on until we got to the purple at the bottom. And when you turn this around, it is a different kind of rainbow, and it is so pretty. So I really love it from either the front or the back. So at any rate, I gush, I know. So once it's quilted, you can trim up those edges so everything is nice and even. And then bind your quilt in the manner of your choice. And I'm just showing this because I did get some questions the last time I did a binding tutorial about what stitch to use and can we machine sew the binding to the back of the quilt. And I got a lot of responses actually when I asked all of you. So some of you said, instead of sewing your binding to the front of your quilt and then folding it around toward the back, to actually first sew it along the back, fold it to the front, and then machine sew it from that angle, and then you're sure to catch all of your fold in your stitching. Now, I am just not that accurate, and I always seem to go a little off kilter, and I just don't like the look of a machine sewn binding because I guess I just haven't perfected it yet. So I always hand sew my binding along the back of the quilt. I make sure that my corners are nice and mitered, and I use a slip stitch or invisible stitch to hand sew it. I also get some questions about creating your own binding versus using a pre-made bias binding. Let me see, just so I can get organized. Okay. So I have here a couple of strips that I have cut on an angle. So in order to create bias binding, you need to cut your strips at a 45-degree angle. It really helps if you have a clear ruler that has those markings on it for you. And then you can get your true 45-degree angle when you're cutting your strips. Now, with a quilt that's so very rectangular, it's not as important to do binding on the bias because you don't really need that stretch to go along, let's say, a curve. For example, for example, this is our Countdown to Christmas Videocast project. This is happening on July 13th. You can register for this videocast now. It's only $5.99 to attend, and you'll get all the tutorial for how to do cross stitch by machine using your embroidery machine. We will also go over some handwork tips as well. But the reason I'm bringing this on now is because this is bound, obviously, as a circle. So bias binding is very important because when you cut something on the bias, it actually gives you a little bit of stretch. You see that? When you cut it on the cross grain or the straight grain, you won't have that stretchability that you need when you're binding something that has a circular or curved shape to it. So it's not necessarily super important to cut your bias on or binding on the bias when you're doing such a square quilt such as this. I guess I am just so used to doing it that way that I just always cut my binding on the bias. Also, if you're using a striped fabric like this, you can get some really fun effects by cutting it on the bias and going sort of candy stripe, like a candy stripe pattern along your binding. So I have a bunch of strips like this, and I need to connect them in order to make my large bias binding piece, right? So a lot of people get sort of caught up in everything must be right sides together when we are sewing with our edges nice and aligned. Well, if you sew your bias binding together with right sides facing like this, look what happens when I go to fold it toward the right side. I'm actually at an angle like a picture frame. And I want a straight piece of binding. So what I have to do is piece the opposite edge so that it actually looks like I'm sewing it like that picture frame. But when I go to press my seam, now I have a straight line. So this is just something you need to train your brain to do. And that is position your pieces so they're sort of opposite or at that angle. The other important thing to remember is we need a seam allowance. So if I was to line up my binding pieces so that my corners and everything matched up, when I go to press this open, I actually am not lined up anymore because of that seam allowance. See what would happen? Either side would be off and I would have to trim that away. So instead, to account for our seam allowances, we offset our angled pieces ever so slightly so we have a little dog ear on each side extending beyond our seam. That is to account for our seam allowance. Now you can get super technical and actually measure this so that you know you are hanging over by 1/4 of an inch. I sort of just eyeball it, honestly. And if I do a little bit bigger of a triangle or dog ear, then I do a little bit wider seam allowance and I just keep going on. So I'm going to sew this and then I will show you what that looks like. And I'm using a contrasting thread so that you will be able to see what it is I am doing and what that looks like. All right. So here we go. I'm just going to sew from edge to edge with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And cut my threads. And you will continue this way until you have a binding piece that's long enough to bind your quilt or whatever project you're doing. So now my seam is sewn. There you can see my contrasting thread. And when I go to press it, I have a nice strip and I can press open my seams. And now those dog ears are extending beyond the long edge of my binding. So I always wait to trim those off until I have folded my binding in half and pressed it again. So this is for double fold bias binding. I would fold this in half with wrong sides together and press my binding along the entire length. See my little dog ear points there? After pressing it, I just trim those off even with the long edge. You know, you could probably trim them before you press if you would like to do that. I just find it easier and kind of more streamlined to wait until the whole thing is pressed and then just trim those little dog ears off. So then this is the piece I will sew to the raw edge of my quilt. Some people always ask me about finishing the binding. How do we join the beginning to the end? Well, at the beginning of my binding, I fold the raw edge about 1/4 inch toward the wrong side and press it nice and flat, so that when I go to sew it in, or to press it in half, I have this fold at the beginning. That's the beginning of my binding. When I go to sew it to the quilt, I don't start sewing it until about maybe 4 inches from that beginning fold. That way, when I come back around and I have the end of my binding that needs to meet the beginning, here's the end of my binding. Bear with me because it's not pressed. All right, so I have my end that needs to meet my beginning. I actually slip the ending inside of that fold I just created. Kinda like this. Now, some people don't like this method because you are going to have a little bit extra bulk by overlapping your beginning and end join. But I find, especially for beginners, this is a really great, quick and easy way to join your end with your beginning without having to sew those together super accurately and making sure that you have, your 45-degree angle and all of that. But for you more advanced quilters, I'm sure that you take these end pieces, place them right sides facing, sew a seam, and then you don't have that little bit extra bulk. So after you kind of overlap or tuck that ending into the beginning, you would finish sewing your binding and then clip off the excess beyond your seam. So that's kind of my favorite way to do binding because I just find it the quickest and the easiest. And that's kind of my mantra, especially when I'm binding a quilt. All right. Let me see if I can find where I am back with my images. Yeah, that may have been it because this was me hand sewing the binding to that project. Perfect. So here is my beautiful finished quilt from the right side, and you can see that really pretty quilting pattern. Now my thread colors kind of disappear into the fabric colors because they kind of match perfectly. But when you turn this over to look at the back side, isn't that pretty? Oh, I love it. I mean, give me a thumbs up. Do you guys like it? You can see the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, all from that rainbow thread palette. And they just, I'm speechless. You know, it takes a very simple quilt. I mean, how simple is the construction of this quilt and elevates it to just a really stunning piece of art. So, you can grab those jelly rolls, especially when you have a coupon or they're a great price at your fabric store. Grab up those jelly rolls, make some quick quilts, and then really go big or go home with the quilting that you choose for your piece. Now, if you're a free motion person or if you like to do end-to-end or edge-to-edge machine embroidery quilting, this is the perfect type of canvas to do all of those beautiful quilting stitches on. So grab up those jelly rolls and have fun with a rainbow quilt. All right. Thank you, Joan. Really beautiful project. I'm not getting a lot of questions today, which is okay. But if you do have questions, be sure to be putting them in the comments and we will address them. Also, remember, if you don't get your question answered today, we are always here for you. You can email us at info@sulky.com and we are happy to assist you with any Sulky products or any of the projects that you see. We want to make sure you're having the best experience with Sulky, so we're here for you. Okay. All right, so the unicorn end of our rainbows and unicorns thread palette really got me thinking, because while I was looking for rainbow fabric prints, I found this one, and again, it worked so nicely with our thread palette. I mean, look at this. Isn't that, I mean, there are just so many fabrics that this thread palette works with, but I was just really getting lucky. So this fabric I could only find as part of a fat quarter collection. And wouldn't you know it, the rest of the fabrics were all unicorn themed and stripes and stars, and it was like fate. So I decided I would, hold on a sec. I decided I would go to my go-to zipper pouch project and create a couple of quilted versions of this zipper pouch. This is a totally lined zipper pouch with no exposed seams, and it's a really quick and easy project. You can add machine embroidery to, which I have done on the blog before. You can add quilting, you can add decorative stitching to it. You can add a fun little tassel, which I have done before as well. But I thought, since this was a quilting palette, that I would add some really easy quilting lines to my fabrics. So the other thing about this pouch is, in my original directions, I instruct you to use a fusible fleece interlining in the pouch. Well, I didn't have any of that on hand, and I thought, I'm quilting here, right? But I don't want my lining quilted as well, because the construction of the pouch doesn't really allow for the lining to be attached to the outer piece. So instead, I used some leftover batting that I had, and instead of fusing it as you would with the fusible fleece, I used the Sulky KK2000 to adhere my fabric to the batting, just as if I were making a quilt sandwich, except I didn't put a backing on it. I quilted through just the outer fabric and the batting. And that way my quilting stitches, I had something to have them grab onto, and I get that kind of quilty, puffy sort of look. And still I could construct the pouch in the way it was intended. So with this, I have some intersecting diagonal quilting lines, and I used a matching thread for the quilting with a different thread color in the bobbin. And that way, if I wanted to switch it up and have some pink lines, some yellow lines, some turquoise lines going along with that rainbow unicorn theme, I could simply sew from the right side and then turn my work over and sew from the wrong side, thereby using two thread colors without having to rethread my machine. So, is that a hack or what? All right, so I have a second one in progress because some of you may know this. I have twin girls, so I can't just make one zipper pouch. I have to make two zipper pouches. Can't just make one skirt. I have to make two skirts, and so on. So it was great to grab up that fat quarter bundle because it gave me a lot of fabrics to choose from for my different versions. But I should also mention this zipper pouch is such a great fat quarter project because you can get two pouches out of two fat quarters, and you can make them different just by swapping the lining for the outer and vice versa. So anyways, this one I have a contrasting thread for the quilting. I use that turquoise thread for this one, and I have this one in progress and this one so that I could show you a little bit of the how-tos. But the whole project comes together really easily, and you can head on over to our zipper pouch blog post to get all the dimensions, all the technical directions for this, and I'll just give you kind of an overview right now so you can see how easily this comes together. But We're about to go on a little road trip for July 4th, so I thought this would be a great project for the girls to finally have their own little toiletry bag. I always just put their toothbrush and stuff in my bag, but you know what? It is time. They are almost 7 years old. I know, they're almost 7 years old. For those of you who knew me way back when in the Sew It All days, you probably saw me perpetually pregnant because I was in some form or stage of pregnancy, either with my son or with my girls, almost for every season of that show. All the time people ask me how many kids I have because they just see me pregnant all the time, but those days are beyond us, folks. Anyway, I digress. They're almost 7, so they can carry their own toothbrush and stuff in their bag. But as you can see, it's fully lined. There are no exposed seams in our zipper, and it's really easy to do. So let me show you how it comes together. And yes, hello, keep your comments coming. Okay, so out of our fat quarter, we're going to cut 2 8-inch by 11-inch rectangles for the outer fabric and 2 8-inch by 11-inch rectangles for our lining fabric. So choose 2 different fabric prints so you can really have fun with it. So I used a friction highlighter pen. We have some of these available at sulky.com. I like to have 2 different colors of them. So one direction of quilting I can see in blue, and the other direction of quilting I can see in green, just so I have a visual cue when I'm at my machine, especially when I'm working on a smaller project like this. I don't want my lines to get too confusing. So I just went corner to corner and drew my lines every 2 inches. So here I am going the opposite direction with my green friction highlighter. And these disappear with heat from your iron. So they're really awesome marking pens to plot your quilting lines. So here I have my sort of diamond grid pattern, and I'm ready for the sewing machine. So choose 1 or 2 or 3 or more thread colors from the 50 weight palette. Again, this is already curated to do rainbow unicorns or rainbows or unicorns. So you have really great thread colors to choose from. These went with every fabric I found that was either unicorn or rainbow related or a mixture of both. So again, it's a great way to save a little bit of money by grabbing up, the entire collection and then going from there to get your fabrics. So quilt your lines. I didn't really have to start out at the middle and go out because I'm only working with an 8 by 11-inch piece. And so if you use your KK2000 and spray your batting really well, you won't have any fabric shifting. And since your lines are 2 inches apart, you can really go any which way you choose. I just did all of my lines going one way and then rotated the work and did all of my lines going the opposite direction. So here my quilting is complete, and I just need to press from the right side to magically remove all of those markings. So I absolutely love these pens. And there you can see all of the markings have disappeared, and I look like a master quilter. Now, granted, this is a very easy design, but hey, I'll take it. All right, so then you just want to trim up your edges a little bit, make sure everything is, nice and tidy after the quilting is complete. So use your trusty rotary cutter and just get your edges nice and tidy. And now it is a matter of adding our zipper. So, sorry, I just lost my place for a moment. There we go. So you're going to take your lining rectangle, place it right side up on your workstation, and then take your zipper and place it right side up on your workstation facing you. Now, this was like a 22-inch long zipper that I had in my stash. So you can see I made my own little zipper stop by stitching over and over and over, back and forth, across my zipper end to just kind of secure the zipper, make my own stop. It's important to note this is a nylon zipper, so I could sew over it without breaking my needle. So if you're using a metal zipper, you'll want to create your own stop by hand stitching like a whip stitch around the zipper teeth. Do not try doing that with your machine because we don't want your needle to break and go flying towards your eyeball or anything like that. So just be mindful of the type of zipper that you're using for this. So once you have your lining face up, your zipper face up, you will then place your outer fabric wrong side up over your zipper. So we've got our fabrics right sides facing and our zipper sandwiched in between. It's important to note this is a directional print that I chose. So you really want to be mindful of the way that your unicorns or rainbows are facing so that they're not upside down on both sides. The other sample I did is not a directional print. So this could go either way. So if you are a beginner or you're teaching somebody to sew, this is a great project to teach someone, by the way. They will feel so accomplished. And again, it's a quick sew too. So they'll have that instant gratification. But anyways, if you're working with a beginner or if you are a beginner your own self, you might want to choose a non-directional print just so you don't have to worry about that. All right, so then I used my trusty Wonder Clips. We have these at Sulky.com. These are the mini Wonder Clips. They have a little bit smaller point to them than the traditional size. I have both. I will take any Wonder Clip I can get. I just think, how did we sew before Wonder Clips? I think it's easier to use Wonder Clips for this because we have that bulk of our outer fabric. We've got our zipper tape and then that lining. So you could certainly use pins, but it's just going to be a little clunky to get through. So Wonder Clips are really nice for this. Clip that in place and then you're going to sew that seam. Be sure to use a zipper foot and move your needle position all the way over so you can get kind of close to your zipper. Now, with this, I stayed actually a little far away from my zipper teeth. In the next one I'm making, I am getting a little bit closer. Now, just if you stay far away, you just have a little bit more kind of body or room in your pouch. So that's really up to you. All right, so, but be sure to move your needle position where you would like it and then adjust your seam allowance accordingly. If you look at your throat plate to guide you for your seam allowance, remember, if you move your needle position over, your 1/4 inch line is no longer a 1/4 inch. So you just need to kind of mentally remember to move that 1/4 inch line in your brain or mark it with some washi tape or masking tape on your machine bed so that you remember where your 1/4 inch is. So you'll sew that seam and move your zipper, when you get to it so that you don't accidentally sew around it and have a little weird notch. You'll want to stop sewing, raise your presser foot, move your zipper, and then continue sewing. Good rule of thumb for the whole zipper process. Okay, so after you do both sides like that in the same manner, you will top stitch along your zipper. So here is a close-up photo of that, but I'm also at that stage with my second sample. I have done my top stitching. I have a front and a back and a front and a back, just like so. So now you will see why we can't quilt these two layers together, because we're going to take our front pieces and separate them from our lining, right? So take your fronts and place them right sides together. And our backs, or our linings, are also right sides together. Important step before we do this is to open our zipper about halfway. If we don't do that, we will have trouble turning this right side out. All right, so my fronts are right sides together. I'm going to give them some Wonder Clips, just a couple. It's pretty stable with all of our batting that we used, and I used a really low loft batting, just a scrap that I had left over from a quilt project. And then I really want to line up my zipper tape ends and make sure that that is perfectly aligned, and then continue clipping my lining. Now, not only do we need our zipper open a little bit, but we also need to have an opening in our lining. We're going to turn the whole thing right side out through the lining, and then we push our lining in through into our outer fabric. So I'm actually going to mark about a 3-inch opening along the lower edge seam of my lining, because if I don't do that, I have a tendency to forget and I sew right over it, and then I have to rip out my seams, and that's no fun. So I am just eyeballing my 3 inches and drawing a little opening there. So now I'm going to sew the perimeter of this. I'm going to start my sewing at one end of my opening, go to the corner, pivot, go all the way around, and then stop at my other opening end. All right, so, and I apologize that I'm not showing my needle camera today, but it was not working out for me. So I will just try and narrate for you. Now at this point, I'm using a 1/2-inch seam allowance. You could go a little bit narrower if you want, but I think a 1/2 inch is good. And when you get to your zipper end, be sure to stitch slowly over that. And again, if you are using a metal zipper, stop at your zipper end, whip stitch that with your hand, and then continue sewing. So honestly, I would really just recommend not using a metal zipper for this, but if you must, you need to take those precautions into account for sure. So just keep sewing and remove those Wonder Clips as you get to them. And we will, I didn't go far enough for my seam allowance. Again, make sure you have opened your zipper part way for this portion. Because you would have to rip everything out if your zipper isn't open. So I'm almost back around to my opening. I'm just going to cut my threads and I will show you. All right, now I have the whole perimeter sewn, and I'm going to turn it right side out through that opening. Or actually, no, I'm not. I need to clean up my edges and trim my seam allowances a little bit. Like I said, I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance for that. So I'm going to trim it to about a 1/4 inch so that my edges are nice and flat. And I'm also going to clip the corners. So here you can see I have clipped that corner up to, but not through, my stitches along the corner. And that is going to allow me a nice crisp corner when I turn it all right side out. So be sure to clip your corners. And then along my opening, I'm going to leave my wide seam allowance just so I have a little bit more to turn toward the wrong side. But I'm going to trim up everything around the opening allowance. So here you can see my opening is a little bit wider of a seam allowance than the rest. Now I'm going to turn her right side out through that opening. And here's where you can see, if I didn't have my zipper open, I would just have a lining pocket right now. But once I get my lining turned out, then I reach into that opening and turn out the rest of the bag. So, super important to open that zipper. I'm just getting my corners nice, and you could use like a chopstick or a knitting needle, or if you have a point turner, you could get your corners really nice and pushed out. And just kind of finger press your seam allowances while you're in there doing that so that everything's nice and flat. So now I have to sew up my opening in the lining. So you can hand sew that, you can machine sew that. It is entirely up to you. You know, it's going to be pushed into your bag, so you can certainly machine sew it. But since I have a little bit wider seam allowance, you can see it really just wants to roll in toward the wrong side on both edges and be nice and flat. So what I'm going to do is use my Wonder Clips to hold that in place. I have a hand sewing needle all set up, but I will not bore you with my slip stitch capabilities. You can use a slip stitch, a ladder stitch. Again, you could just top stitch this by machine, and that would be perfectly acceptable. So tuck in any thread ends that you have, and then finish up that edge. And then you will just tuck your lining into your outer piece, give it a little press, and just like that, your cute little zipper pouch is complete. This is a great thing you can personalize for gift recipients. You can add little goodies inside. If you wanted to make little activity pouches for your kids on road trips, you could add, you know, some markers and a little pad of paper in here, and they can keep their things all nice. You know, in past road trips, I have made a couple of activity pouches, and then every hour that we're in the car for, let's say, a 3 or 4 hour road trip, they get a new pouch to open. And so it's something exciting to kind of look forward to. But now that my children are a little older, and I guess I'm a little bit more exhausted, I don't go that far, but it's really cute to give them their own pouch. And I'm going to put a new toothbrush in there and a tube of toothpaste so they have their own, you know, thing to take with them to the bathrooms when we're out and about. So rainbows and unicorns, who doesn't love it? I mean, super cute. And just like that, I have my second one completed as well, just in the time pretty much of our So What today. So I hope you all enjoy the tutorial and you make a beautiful rainbow quilt, a cute set of zipper pouches, and you're on your way to some really great summer sewing projects. So speaking of summer sewing, our summer sewing session with the Deanie pouch is still going on. It's available on demand at any time. So if you were on the fence about joining our summer sewing session, give it a try. You won't be disappointed. You get the pattern included with your cost of the session, and tons of video instruction from the pattern designer from Sally Tomato. So that just got me thinking, summer sewing session. I have my pouch right here. It's another zipper pouch. This one's a little bit more complicated. Features a really cute tassel, metallic machine embroidery. It has some challenging sewing techniques. So if you're a little bit more advanced sewer, I think you will still be challenged by this, and you will love the end result. So this is kind of the kid pouch, right? And this is the mama pouch. So you could store your sewing supplies inside, or really just use it as a really pretty clutch when you're out and about. All right. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining me today. Again, we are getting all of your questions and comments answered. If you didn't get anything answered today and you need an answer to your question right away, again, please email us at info@sulky.com. And for all of you engaging with the post today, giving me those thumbs up, commenting, asking your questions, sharing the post today, you are eligible for our great freebie, which is the Rainbows and Unicorns 50-weight cotton thread palette by Sulky, valued at $24.99. You can grab this at sulky.com, and I hope you're a winner. All right. Again, thanks for joining me, and I will see you all next week for another edition of So What?